New drug slashes heart attack risk by 50%. You've seen this headline. Or perhaps it was, eating this food doubles your chance of cancer? Or, this vaccine is 95% effective. We are inundated every single day by a barrage of statistics that promise to guide our health, our safety, and our lives. These numbers are presented as objective, powerful, and final. But I am a curious skeptic. And if you are watching this, you probably are too. My work here at the Viral Veritas is to deconstruct these claims, to peel back the layers of data, and to find the signal hidden within the noise. When I see a headline that proclaims a 50% risk reduction, my first question isn't how. My first question is, 50% of what? This single, simple question is, perhaps, the most important tool you can possess in the modern world. Because the answer reveals the vast, powerful, and often deliberately confusing gap between two fundamental concepts: relative risk and absolute risk. This isn't just academic hair-splitting. Understanding this difference is the key to decoding nearly all health news. It is the primary mechanism by which a minor clinical finding can be spun into a blockbuster media story. It's the statistical tool that allows advertisers to frame a product in the most favorable light, and media outlets to capture your finite attention. And, most critically, it is the barrier that often stands between you and a truly informed decision about your own health. This is the central paradox of our information age. We have more data than ever, but arguably less clarity. The stakes are not just our understanding, they are our anxiety, our hope, and our trust in the very science that is meant to empower us. So today, we are not deconstructing a specific virus or a new outbreak. We are instead performing a methodological deep dive. We are examining the very lens through which we are told to view those outbreaks. To find the truth, we need to answer three fundamental questions. First, what is relative risk? We will deconstruct this metric, look at the simple mathematics behind it, and understand why it is so persuasive, so dramatic, and so beloved by headline writers. Second, what is absolute risk? We will introduce this sober, grounding metric and see how it provides the essential context that is so often missing. And finally, we will place these two measures side by side. We will apply them to a real-world case study using the same set of data and watch as two completely different stories emerge. This is the Viral Veritas, and this is our science-explained guide to reading the news. Before we enter the statistical clean room, we must first affirm our guiding principle. Here at the Viral Veritas, our commitment is to radical transparency. This means we don't just show you the conclusions, we show you the process. In a methodological explainer like this, that process is the story. We will not be cherry-picking data to fit a narrative. Instead, we are going to deconstruct the statistical tools themselves. We will build our understanding from the ground up, moving from the simple to the complex, using the same rigorous, peer-reviewed methods that guide clinical decision-making. We are, in effect, opening the black box of health statistics so that you can see the machinery inside. Our investigation will proceed in 3 chapters. First, we will explore the world of relative risk. Second, we will ground ourselves in the context of absolute risk. And third, we will unleash these two concepts on a real-world example and watch the conflict unfold. Chapter 1. The Seduction of Relative Risk. Let's begin with the metric that dominates the airwaves: relative risk. At its core, relative risk is a comparison. It answers the question, how does the risk of Group A compare to the risk of Group B? It is almost always expressed as a ratio or a percentage, which is precisely what makes it so powerful. A 50% reduction sounds far more impressive than a 0.01 change. To deconstruct this, let's use a clear, hypothetical example. Imagine a large, randomized controlled trial, the gold standard, a Tier 2 source of evidence, for a new medication we'll call Wonder Drug X. This trial tracks 20,000 people over 1 year to see if the drug prevents a specific, non-lethal condition, Syndrome Y. We can visualize the results as a simple, clean data table. On one side, we have the control group. These 10,000 people received a placebo. On the other side, we have the treatment group. These 10,000 people received Wonder Drug X. Now, we look at the results. In the control group, 200 people developed Syndrome Y. In the treatment group, only 100 people developed Syndrome Y. The data is clear. The drug appears to have had an effect. But how we report this effect is everything. A journalist or a marketing team will immediately look to calculate the relative risk. They see that the risk in the treatment group, 100 people, is half of the risk in the control group, 200 people. The math is simple, 100, 200, sus 0.5. The risk was cut in half. This allows for the explosive, accurate, and deeply seductive headline, Wonder Drug X slashes syndrome risk by 50%. This is the relative risk reduction. Why is this so seductive? Because it emphasizes the proportional change, and our brains are wired to respond to these simple, dramatic ratios. A 50% reduction feels intuitive and massive. It implies a powerful, protective shield. But it tells us nothing about the scale of the threat. Was Syndrome Y a mild inconvenience or a severe illness? And most importantly, what was your actual chance of getting it in the first place? The 50% number, while true, exists in a statistical vacuum. It has no context. It is a story without a setting. To find that setting, we must turn to our second metric. Chapter 2. The sobering context of absolute risk. This brings us to the most important and most often ignored concept in public health reporting, absolute risk. Absolute risk, sometimes called risk difference, is not a comparison or a ratio. It is the actual tangible change in your personal odds of experiencing an event. It answers the question, by how many percentage points did my personal risk go down? Let's return to our exact same data table from the Wonder Drug X trial. We will not change a single number. We will only change the lens we use to view it. First, let's establish the baseline risk. In the control group of 10,000 people, 200 got Syndrome Y. The math for this is 210,000, which gives us 0.02. So the absolute risk for the placebo group was 2%. This is our baseline. This means without the drug, you have a 2% chance of developing Syndrome Y in a year. Now let's look at the treatment group. Of the 10,000 people, 100 got Syndrome Y. The math is 110,000, which is 0.01. The absolute risk for the drug group was 1%. Now, we can perform the critical calculation. The absolute risk reduction, ARR, is the difference between these two. We simply subtract one from the other. 2% minus 1% equals 1%. This is our Primum Non Nocere number. This is the sober, clinical reality. Taking Wonder Drug X for a year reduces your personal, absolute chance of getting Syndrome Y by 1 percentage point. Suddenly, the story has changed. Drug slashes risk by 50%. Drug reduces your chance of illness by 1%. Both statements are 100% factually correct. They are derived from the exact same Tier 2 data. But one is a sales pitch, and the other is the basis for an informed medical decision. This 1% absolute risk reduction is the number that empowers us. It allows us to ask the next logical question, one that is fundamental to epidemiology. Is it worth it? To answer that, we calculate one final powerful metric, the number needed to treat, or NNT. The NNT answers the question, how many people must take this drug for one person to be saved from the negative outcome? The calculation is beautifully simple. You just divide 1 by the absolute risk reduction. In our case, the ARR was 1%, or 0.01. So, 1, 0, 0, 1, 100. The NNT is 100. This means you would have to treat 100 people with wonder drug X for 1 year to prevent one single case of syndrome Y. This is the number that allows for a real-world cost-benefit analysis. The other 99 people who took the drug, they received no benefit. They were either going to be fine anyway, or they got syndrome Y despite taking the drug. Now a public health official, a doctor, and you, the curious skeptic, can have a real conversation. If wonder drug X is extremely cheap and has 0 side effects, an NNT of 100 might be a fantastic public health bargain. But what if the drug costs $10,000 a year? Is it worth $1,000, 100 patients x $10,000, to prevent one case of syndrome Y? What if the drug has a side effect profile causing serious, new problems in 3% of patients? Suddenly, you are treating 100 people to help one, and you are harming 3. The 50% reduction headline hides all of this. The absolute risk and its partner, the NNT, reveals it. This is the radical transparency of methodology. Chapter 3. The Case Study. 2 stories. 1 truth. Now you are armed with the full toolkit. You can distinguish the relative story from the absolute context. Let's apply this toolkit to the very headline we opened with, one that is all too common. We see this headline on a Tier 3 news site. Landmark trial, new statin cardio save. Slashes heart attack risk by 50%. This headline is based on a real Tier 2 landmark study in a journal like The Lancet or the New England Journal of Medicine. As calm deconstructionists, we ignore the headline and go straight to the data table in the study's appendix. Here is what we find. The study followed 20,000 people, all considered high risk for a major cardiac event, over a period of 5 years. Group 1, placebo, 10,000 people. Over 5 years, 400 people had a major cardiac event, a heart attack. Group 2, cardio save, 10,000 people. Over 5 years, 200 people had a major cardiac event. Let's watch as 2 entirely different narratives are spun from this single, objective set of data. Narrative 1, the relative risk, the headline. The news outlet looks at the numbers. 200 events in the drug group, 400 events in the placebo group. They see that 200 is half of 400. The proportional change is massive. The headline is born, cardio save slashes heart attack risk by 50%. This is the relative risk reduction. It is mathematically true. It is also, from a public perspective, dangerously incomplete. It suggests that if you are at risk, this drug will save you. It implies a 50-50 coin flip has been miraculously tilted in your favor. Millions of people will read this, feel a jolt of hope or fear, and call their doctor demanding the miracle drug. Narrative 2, the absolute risk, the clinical decision. We, however, are curious skeptics. We will rerun the numbers with our absolute risk lens. First, The baseline risk? In the placebo group, 400 out of 10,000 people had an event. $410,000, JAMR 0.04. The 5-year absolute risk for this high-risk group is 4%. This means a high-risk patient without treatment has a 4 in 100 chance of having a heart attack in the next 5 years. Second, the treatment risk. In the CardioSave group, 200 out of 10,000 people had an event. 210,000, DASAMIR 0.02. The 5-year absolute risk while on the drug is 2%. Now, we calculate the absolute risk reduction, ARR. We subtract the new risk from the baseline risk, 4%, 2%, 2%. This is the entire story. Instead of the 50% reduction headline, the absolute story is this. For a high-risk individual, taking CardioSave for 5 years reduces your personal chance of a heart attack from 4% down to 2%. The total benefit is a 2 percentage point drop. This is a profoundly different narrative. It is far less dramatic, but infinitely more useful. It allows for an informed, calm conversation. And for our final calculation, what is the number needed to treat NNT? We divide 1 by the absolute risk reduction, 2%, or 0.02. 1, 0.02, 50. The NNT is 50. This means a doctor must treat 50 high-risk patients with CardioSave for 5 years to prevent one single heart attack. This context is everything. This is the number that separates science from marketing. The other 49 patients who take the drug for 5 years, they receive no direct benefit from it, but they do absorb the cost and do expose themselves to any potential side effects. Is it a good trade-off? For a serious outcome like a heart attack, an NNT of 50 is often considered very good by clinical standards. The answer most likely is yes. It's a valuable drug. But it is not the miracle that the 50% reduction headline promised. We have now seen the two faces of this data. We have seen how the same two numbers, 400 and 200, can be used to weave two entirely different stories. One story is designed to capture your attention. The other is designed to inform your consent. The choice of which metric to present to the public is therefore not a statistical choice. It is an ethical choice. It is a choice of intent. And in a world driven by clicks, views, and advertising revenue, the intent is almost always to choose the most dramatic, most seductive, and most misleading number, the relative risk. This is the fundamental flaw in our media health complex. And this is the core of what it means to be a methodological deconstructionist. We have revealed the mechanism. This brings us to our final, critical synthesis. We have seen what these numbers are. We have seen how they are used. Now we must answer the most important question, why? And what can we, as curious skeptics, do about it? We began this deconstruction with a simple skeptical question, 50% of what? Over the course of our investigation, we have dissected the statistical machinery behind that question. We have seen how a single, objective set of data, a Tier 2 clinical trial, can be meticulously crafted into two profoundly different narratives. This brings us to the grand synthesis. This is the aha moment. The two stories we've uncovered, the story of relative risk and the story of absolute risk, are not in a battle for the truth. They are simply two different tools, designed for two different jobs. Chapter 1 showed us that relative risk is a tool for measuring impact. It is a high-contrast lens that magnifies the proportional change between two groups. This makes it the perfect tool for headlines, for grabbing attention, and for communicating the potential of an intervention in the most dramatic terms possible. Chapters 2 and 3 showed us that absolute risk is a tool for measuring context. It is the clinical, wide-angle lens that reveals the entire landscape. It grounds us in reality, showing us our baseline risk and the true, tangible scale of any potential benefit. This makes it the essential tool for informed decisions. The aha moment is this. The problem is not that relative risk exists. The problem is that it is so often presented alone. Relative risk, when stripped of its absolute context, is no longer a scientific tool. It is a tool of persuasion, and often a tool of manipulation. So let's directly answer the question from Act 1. When you see a headline that says, "New drug slashes heart attack risk by 50%, what does it truly mean? The evidence we've deconstructed shows unequivocally that this number is an incomplete story. It feels like a promise of near invincibility, but the reality is often far more modest. That 50% reduction might, as we saw, be the difference between a 4% risk and a 2% risk. A meaningful clinical benefit, certainly, but not a miracle. It is a 2 percentage point gain, not a 50-point shield. This leads us to our Primum Non Nocere verdict. First, do no harm. In the world of health communication, harm is not just physical. Harm is panic. Harm is false hope. Harm is the erosion of public trust when miracle drugs fail to deliver on the implied promise of a headline. The verdict, therefore, is not to mistrust science. It is to demand better communication from those who report on it. The ethical responsibility for media, for institutions, and for us as scientific translators is to always report the absolute risk alongside the relative risk. Anything less is a disservice to the public's intelligence. And for you, the curious skeptic, this is your empowerment. You now have the toolkit. This is the outlook. The next time you are confronted with a sensational statistic, you are no longer a passive recipient. You are a deconstructionist. You are armed with the two most important questions in health literacy. First, you will ask, what is the absolute risk? What was the baseline risk for the people in the control group? And second, what is the absolute risk reduction? By how many percentage points did my personal, actual risk decline? If the article, the report, or the newscast cannot or will not provide those two numbers, then the 50% reduction it is selling you is, at best, incomplete and, at worst, an act of statistical manipulation. You now have the lens. You can see the signal in the noise. And in a world saturated with data, that is the ultimate form of intellectual self-defense.